Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Ambassador Broza, General Steiges, Excellencies, I'm delighted to be able to speak today in honor of my good friend, Gerald Knaus. I had hoped to be able to deliver these remarks in person, not only because of my respect for Gerald's career, but also because of the special meaning attached to the place where this award is being given. I remember visiting Berlin when armed checkpoints and concrete kept its citizens apart. But 32 years ago next month, the wall that once divided this city began to crumble and history began to gallop. After decades of darkness, the European continent was flooded with light. I was fortunate to serve in government during the remarkable years that followed the end of the Cold War. Our overriding goal in the United States and in Europe was to bring nations closer together around shared economic principles, a commitment to peace, and support for the rule of law. We worked to strengthen our NATO alliance by adding new members and accepting new and broader responsibilities. In the Balkans, NATO was twice tested and twice successful. First, ending the war in Bosnia, and then acting to halt ethnic cleansing in Kosovo. We knew back then that although the world had become freer, it was not any less dangerous. But we had tools we could use and multilateral institutions with legitimacy and clout. We also had friends we could count on, and one of the best was a young man named Gerald Knaus. At the time, Gerald was working for the Office of the High Representative in Bosnia, the senior civilian official in charge of implementing the Dayton Accords. Having seen the decision-making process up close, he realized that many of the facts, in quotation marks, that were being used to make policy were conjectures based on out-of-date statistics. He established a new organization, the European Stability Initiative, with the mission of finding out facts in order to better inform policy. One of the first projects that ESI undertook was a deep dive into the political economy of Bosnia. This research was based on the insight that international officials working on Bosnia were focused on the formal processes and institutions of government, but Bosnian politicians were focused more on doling out jobs and revenues from state-owned enterprises and businesses under their control. The result was that Bosnian politics was a consortium of the three biggest parties, which did not compete with each other. ESI's 2000 report, Taking on the Commanding Heights, as it was called, urged attention to these shadow negotiations, and I can testify to its impact because I was still Secretary of State. The report led us to change U.S. policy to remove some of these resources from control of the political parties. The result was Bosnia's first and so far only non-nationalist government. It is exceedingly rare for any research institution to have such a direct impact on policymakers, let alone one that had only been around for 1 year. But Gerald's vision for ESI was for it to be a practical and useful tool for policymakers. One of the critical ways it accomplishes that mission is by undertaking a quality, long-term, practical research. And I saw this firsthand many years later during the Syrian refugee crisis, when I traveled to Berlin with a number of my former foreign minister colleagues. Our group, known as the Aspen Ministers Forum, met with Gerald and received an incredible briefing based on information from ESI researchers who had traveled to the Greek islands where the refugees had first landed. Gerald's team understood the bottlenecks that were preventing the speedy processing of refugees, pointing out a lack of personnel and basic technology that were leading to a humanitarian disaster. He set out a practical approach to saving lives and processing people humanely based on observable facts about the conditions, the physical requirements of the region, and the resources available. His recommendations were at first not heeded by European governments that were overwhelmed by the scale of the problem. But Gerald and ESI persisted, and eventually many of their practical solutions were adopted. This persistence and focus on political solutions have been hallmarks of Gerald's work, and they have proven to be essential qualities for those working to advance security and the rule of law in the 21st century. Because it's no secret that the pendulum swinging worldwide between democracy and despotism has moved in the wrong direction for the last 15 years. The lessons learned during World War II about the benefits of multilateral cooperation and the dangers of unbridled nationalism are no longer fresh. The majority of people in Europe and North America are too young even to remember the Cold War in any depth. Democracies, instead of being compared to totalitarian states, are being judged on whether they are meeting the expectations of their citizens, a much higher standard. According to the poem by William Butler Yeats, it is when the best lack all conviction and the worst are full of passionate intensity that things fall apart, the center cannot hold, and anarchy is loosed upon the world. That doesn't describe our times, or at least not yet, but certainly the worst among us are full of passionate intensity. The question is whether the best have the courage of their convictions so that things will not fall apart and the center will hold. To me, the answer to that question will be found in the work of organizations such as the European Stability Initiative that are committed to defending democracy and exposing the corruption and lies that are at the heart of the autocrats' appeal. Now, this is not easy work. We may not admire dictators, but that doesn't mean they're stupid. In fact, some of them are very adept at shaping public perceptions and checkmating political opponents. They also have the advantage of intimidation. Few are above using force to harass rivals and disrupt protests. Their goal is not so much to change minds as it is to convince people with democratic aspirations to give up. Sometimes this works, but we should not abandon hope. We have learned from the past that people and democracies are resilient, that time brings new opportunities, and that even so-called presidents for life come with a built-in expiration date. In my view, the human desire for change causes history's course to swing back and forth in the manner of a pendulum. That means a switch in momentum can be expected. In fact, some of the same forces that have fueled the rise of demagogues could undermine the staying power of authoritarian regimes now old enough to embody the status quo. There's a limit, after all, to how long an autocrat can sustain popularity simply by comparing himself to a despised predecessor. In Russia, Putin is rarely contrasted anymore with poor Boris Yeltsin, and Orban and Erdogan have both been empowered too long to escape responsibility for the sad state of their countries. In Belarus, a major protest movement has emerged because a growing number of citizens consider President Alexander Lukashenko to be a Russian puppet and want him to leave. One thing about demagogues, they brag a lot, and when their boasts fall flat, their claim on the public's imagination will wane. And I believe that will happen more and more in the months and years to come. And here we arrive at a key point that ESI and others have articulated so well. Despite the battering democracy has endured, most people want to strengthen, not discard their democratic systems. In recent years, the sense of complacency among those who care most about democracy has disappeared, and with it, the unrealistic euphoria that took hold when the Berlin Wall fell. Thanks to ESI, Gerald, and countless others, alarms about freedom's future are spreading far and wide. And on both sides of the Atlantic, people are standing together and vowing that we will not allow the peddlers of hate to shape our future. We will not allow them to turn us against one another or to treat our neighbors with contempt. We will not allow them to hijack the institutions that ensure our freedom and define our democracies. We will not abandon all that we have gained through decades of shared sacrifice, and we will not remain silent as they strive to drain the meaning from words and to convince us that up is down, wrong is right, and truth is whatever they claim it to be. Instead, every country and from all parts of the political spectrum, we must insist on the integrity of our own minds, the importance of democratic values, the rights of the majority and minorities, and the dignity of every human being. These are the principles for which Gerald Knaus has dedicated his career, and with these beliefs behind us, I'm convinced that there is no threat before us against which we cannot prevail. Thank you for honoring this special man today, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak.